Hello and welcome to The Switch. This is the series where we talk to inspirational people about big turning points in their lives and how we can all position ourselves for success. I'm Jude Law and I'm lucky enough to get to quiz our guests about the precise mix of skills, behaviours, traits and sheer grit that has let them reach the top of their game. In particular, I'm interested in those pivotal light bulb moments that inspires these people and what we can all learn from them. Join us for this week's episode Behind the Scenes as we discuss the foundation of work that goes into achieving success, stepping out into the limelight and the power of embracing a persona. Our guest will tell us about her journey from theatre to television to St James's Place and how she uses her unique skill set to help people realise their full potential. But importantly, The Switch is also about you, our listeners. Are you content with your life, your career? Are you considering making a switch of your own? Or are you maybe looking for a new direction or the motivation to take a crucial step up? Whatever your situation, I hope that you'll take inspiration from this show. And as the series continues, we'd love to take your questions for our future guests. To introduce myself, I work at the UK's largest provider of face-to-face financial advice, St James's Place. And I'm involved in our Financial Advisor Academy, which has so far trained over 1,000 individuals to become financial advisors. These are people from all walks of life who decided to make their own career switch. To inspire others to do the same, we're talking to extraordinary leaders across sport, psychology, and in this episode, entertainment. We're diving into the topics of resilience and growth with someone who's turned setbacks into success, learnt to embrace their self-awareness, and who recognises that growth is a humble and ongoing journey of exploration. Carole is a performance coach working with individuals to unlock their best selves. She's been at St James's Place for the last 4 years and heads up the skills development team. Prior to that, Carole worked for 15 years in television, starting out as a runner before moving into front of camera roles as a presenter, broadcast journalist, and working at MTV, ITV, GMTV, and the BBC, to name a few, where she honed strategies for excelling under pressure and navigating competitive environments that she has since then brought into the corporate world and works with leaders and teams globally. Carole is passionate about unlocking consistent high performance and delving into the psychology behind it. And she helps individuals and companies increase their confidence and develop strategies for lifelong growth. Carole, welcome and thank you so much for taking time to join us here on The Switch.
Thanks for having me.
So that was quite an introduction. I'm really excited about our interview today. So first of all, tell us about one of your biggest learns from your career to date, because it has expanded across many different sectors.
That's quite a question to start with. Gee, my goodness me, what's my biggest learn? There's been so many, but there's one that has stayed with me for years, and it's something that happened to me when I was at MTV. So my role at MTV, essentially I was entertainment news presenter, and so as part of that I would do a lot of the press junkets. So either on the red carpet in Leicester Square, or I'd go to one of the hotels to interview actors to talk about their new releases. And there was one episode in particular that has stayed with me because it was an interview that I was doing with Jude Law. Now, this is quite a few years ago now, but I was at that point in my career where I was still relatively new, especially to TV, and I wanted to make a great first impression. Of course I did. So ahead of this interview, my producer came to see me and they said, look, we've got an opportunity here. Now, the film, I can't even remember the name of the film now, but the film that Jude was in, it was about the fact that he had had an affair. I think it was even with his nanny in the film. And essentially, it was like life repeating itself on film. So at the same time, in Jude's personal life, it was all over the media that he'd had an affair. And so my producer came to me and said, look, Carole, we've got an opportunity here to start to kind of weave in and understand actually his thoughts, his perspective on his personal life, i.e. his thoughts around his affair. And so my producer said, look, Carole, we really want you to ask this question. And you know, when you find yourself in that situation where your gut's saying, don't do that. That's a really stupid thing to do. And it really went against my values. And yet, I was a journalist at MTV and I thought, you know what, I've got an opportunity here. So I turned up for the interview and the interview was going really well. We were building great rapport. We were laughing. We were joking. The interview was a really great interview. we got along, and he was really sort of sharing some great anecdotes, and it was going really well. And I had that moment in my mind where I thought, you know what, shall I do it? Because we're getting to the point where we were wrapping up the interview. Shall I do it? And I did it. I asked the question that I should never have asked. And it was at that moment that everything changed. At that moment, he just looked at me like I was dirt. And the interview just stopped. And I can't remember who it was now, someone who was looking after him and his press just like interrupted the interview and says, right, we need your tape. It was at the time when we, filmed on tape. We need your tape. We need to edit that. And it was just a big, big mistake. How dare I? He didn't turn up to that interview to talk about his personal life. He turned up to talk about the film that he was in. And I took it in the wrong direction. And to this day, I'm really sorry for what I did. And it has stayed with me because it crossed a line. So I think perhaps one of my biggest learns from that was, well, one is to trust your gut, but also to know what you stand for. I made a mistake, and even now I feel really bad about it.
I can tell when you're telling that story, and I can only imagine. But as you say, you were younger. Your boss, so to speak, is telling you to do something. And so I guess my lesson from your lesson is work somewhere that is aligned to your values. So what happened after that? Did you feel that it was the right job for you, or was it just...
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, working at MTV had always been a dream. As a child, you get to, you watch a movie, you see a pop video, whatever it might be, and you go, God, I'd love to have the opportunity to meet them, to really find out what it is that makes them tick, how it is they've got to where they are in their careers. So working at MTV was always a dream. And so when I got the opportunity to work there, I was so excited. And it was an amazing time. I was there for a couple of years, predominantly doing the entertainment news. And I learned a lot about myself, and I got to sort of tick a lot of boxes in terms of people that I wanted to meet and having exposure to things that I did. But it was a really interesting time for me, MTV, for various reasons, because I think, if I'm honest, I never felt like I really properly fitted in. And I did a couple of years there, and I learned a lot about politics in particular. But for me, I think one of the final kind of memories of MTV was when I turned up early one day. So I was really lucky. I had a car in every day, which was lovely. And, I got treated really, really well. But towards the end of my time there, I turned up early one day and I went down to some of the studios to see what was going on. And there were some people being filmed. And I thought, okay, what's going on here then? And it was then that I realised that the people that were being filmed were basically people that were auditioning for my job. So I found out after a couple of years that, they'd decided to change the way that they were filming, use different presenters. But rather than come and talk to me about it, adult to adult, they decided to kind of keep me out of it, find my replacement and somebody else's replacement, get them lined up first, and then tell us.
Wow.
So I think, there's a lot that I took from that. And would I change it? Probably not, because I learned a lot about myself through those couple of years there. And I learned the importance of having really good people around you. In that kind of bubble of MTV, you can kind of get swept up into a land of, I don't know, like make-believe. There's parties, it's exciting. But what was really always important to me is having the right people around me that could keep me grounded. So
absolutely, really, really good lens. So what's your biggest motivator in life? Why do you do what you do?
Wow. Okay, biggest motivator in life. God, these are some really tricky questions, Jim. Biggest motivator. Right, okay, so I think the thing that has stayed with me throughout my entire career is I'm really passionate about growth. I'm passionate about people, I'm passionate about growth, and I'm passionate about performance. And I think they're the things that have stayed with me from the beginning of my career. I've always looked for ways to push myself, to try new things out, to experience new things. And I've always looked to do that with people and through people. So I think one of the biggest motivators for me is opportunities to expand my knowledge, my experience, my skill set, and do that with people. So I'm motivated by being around the right people. And when I talk about the right people, my kind of people are the people that keep me in check. So, and I talk about this a lot, actually. I talk about the idea of who's at your table, who's on your bench. There's lots of different ways of looking at it. Essentially, it's really thinking about who are the people that keep you in check. And they're the people around you that motivate you to be the best version of yourself, the people that can really challenge your thinking, the people that support you no matter what. So I think I've gone through quite an eclectic career. It's gone in lots of different directions. But I think the thing that's kept me grounded and helped me to motivate myself is making sure I've got the right people around me.
Absolutely. Now, we mentioned that your TV career, and we jumped straight to MTV at the beginning, but before that, you started in theatre. So growing up, did you see those signs of where your career path might take you into that world of entertainment?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think it's only when you get older and you look back that you can start to join the dots. So, I think what's really hilarious, and you'll remember this, being at school, you used to have like career advice, and you'd go and speak to someone and you'd talk about, what your dreams, your aspirations. I don't know what I said in that meeting, but this person concluded that the right career for me was to be a librarian, which I just think, like, seriously, like, really? How? Why? I mean,
The opposite.
well, exactly. And apart from anything else, I just can't shut up. So I would have been terrible in that career. But I think there are things that when you look back, you go, yeah, okay. I think as a child, less so now, but as a child, I used to love bringing people together, organizing events. I was quite confident. I used to love to I've always been driven by variety, having an opportunity to do different stuff. And I think always been quite inspired by others. So I would always look for role models. Who are the people that I look up to? So, like I said, when I worked at MTV, I was able to meet some of those people, which was super exciting. So I've always been really excited by kind of pushing myself, stretching myself, and looking out and seeing who inspires me. So I started off in theatre, but I was acting and performing from a really young age. There was something, and there still is actually something really exciting about a live environment, because you never quite know what's going to happen. And so when you stand on a stage, or same with TV actually, especially if you're doing live TV, you have a job to take people on a journey. Now, no matter what that journey is, that's your role, is to take people on a journey. And so that's a really exciting and quite scary environment to be in. And I kind of had access to that quite early on in my career. So even at school, I was acting and doing exams and things. And I just loved the feeling of standing up, delivering something, and seeing the impact of that.
Amazing. And great that you had the opportunity to do that, because I feel like some schools are better than others at developing that side of the curriculum.
And I don't even know if it's school, actually. I think, if I'm honest, my mum was a big advocate. So my mum was the kind of person that would just say, do you know what? If you want to do something, do it. Like, she had, and I don't quite know how or why, but she had faith in me from a really early age and gave me every opportunity. So I was really lucky. So I think for me, it was more that we had a speech and drama studio where I lived. We also had a dance school. And so I had access to both of those. So from a really early age, I think that actually helped as well as a teenager, that I was always quite focused. So I used to go out and get into all sorts of mischief. Of course I did. But I always kind of always knew ultimately where I wanted to end up, or at least a sort of vision of what the future could look like. And so for me, I remember I remember a really funny story of when I was 17 at the time, and I had got involved with a bit of modeling, and someone had seen me do something, and they basically approached me and said, "Hey, listen, do you fancy bringing together a dance troupe and going to the Falkland Islands with Paul Daniels?" And my dad came home from school. He was a teacher at our school. And I was looking at the atlas. He said, and I was looking at Scotland. And he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm trying to find the Falkland Islands. He was like, you're not looking in Scotland, my friend. The Falklands is the other side of the world. And so I had this amazing opportunity really early on to go and do something crazy. You know, I traveled across to the Falklands. I created this dance troupe. We made these ridiculous costumes that had way too much sequins and glitter. And we just ended up in the Falklands doing the most incredible thing. And then when I got home, my dance teacher said, listen, there's an opportunity in London to go for a show called Joseph. Do you fancy it? And you know, when you're young and you just kind of feel like you're just going to throw yourself into anything and just give it a go. I was like, yeah, no problem. I'll give it a go. So I went down to London on my own, having never been to London before on my own. So I had all my maps and everything. I can't believe my mum let me do it, actually. And I went to this open audition in London with all these professionals. So they were there with the right kit on and they had their sight music to sing from. I had none of that. I was so naive. And I rocked up and I did my stuff. And I don't know how, but I got the job. So I spent the Thursday and the Friday in London auditioning. By the Monday morning, I was back in London rehearsing for the show.
Wow.
But I think the thing for me was that a lasting memory was watching my mum and dad at the train station on the Sunday night, waving me off. You know, now as a parent, I don't know how they did that, because I just went off to London on my own. This time I was 18 years old, but didn't have a clue about anything really, and went for it.
Wow. And where was home? Where were you traveling from?
Leicester.
Wow.
Yeah, Leicester.
So it sounds like you had a very supportive family.
I did.
Any siblings?
I do. I have one, my sister Roz. I would class my sister as my second mum. So she's a sensible one out of the two of us. And actually, we bought a house together in London and now we live close to each other in Surrey as well. So, yeah, no, we're really close.
Amazing. So theatre, you took you down that path. You managed to nail your first audition, it sounds like, and then moved into television as a runner before getting into the presenting. So was television always part of that vision that you had as a young person? Or was it something that from theatre you then thought was possible?
It's hard to say, was it the vision that I had? I was excited by it. I think at that point, I probably thought that anything was possible. You know, if you work hard, opportunities came my way. And when I was younger, I said yes a lot. So I did Joseph for about 1.5 years and I loved it. But I was also quite pragmatic and I knew that I didn't have the singing voice that would mean that I could take a lead on a show. And my husband laughs when I sing at home now. I think I'm really good, G, just to be clear. He thinks I'm hopeless. So I knew that I kind of did my time in theatre and loved it, but thought, actually, this isn't where I'm meant to be. And so, again, I met somebody and they were looking for some runners for a TV show in Manchester. And so I tried out for that and again was really lucky and got an opportunity to start out in TV as a runner, which is where most people start. And I think I grafted. I really, really grafted. And I think that is something that from an early age, and it still stays with me now, I'm diligent, I'm consistent, and I work hard. And so when I worked in telly as a runner, I was really curious, asked loads of questions, built up my network, built trusted relationships, and you know, thankfully was given opportunities to kind of grow and develop, and so I went from a runner to a third AD and second AD, first AD, and kind of worked up through the ranks. And I think when you work in TV production, you start to really understand what it takes to make a TV show. And I think an important lesson for me back then was when I worked, I think at the time I was probably the third assistant director. And so part of my role was to work with the talent, the talent. So one of the shows I worked on was Hollyoaks. And so as part of that, my job was to make sure the actors were where they needed to be, was to make sure they got to set on time and all that kind of stuff, and to kind of run their lines with them. And you start to realize that, and this isn't the case for every person, every cast member, but there was a bit of a theme there where you had a team of people, a crew of probably about 20 to 30 people that are grafting. They are, to make a TV show work, there are so many different elements to it. Lights, sound, cameras, all of it. And the talent is such a small part. And I remember one actor in particular who, I'm not going to name any names, but he had a really simple line to deliver. And I went to pick him up from the green room and he was like, "Hey, Carole, can you run my lines with you? Can you run my lines with me?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And he just couldn't get this blinking line out. And it was it was something really silly, like he walked into the cafe and he was meant to say something like, "Hi, I'm so sorry I'm late. I got caught up with whatever." And it was such a simple line. And he could not deliver that line. He basically hadn't done any prep. So you've got a crew of 20 to 30 people that have spent the last hour setting up this shot. And then you've got this one guy that just cannot deliver his line. I think we went to like 18 takes.
Oh my goodness. And just not having their respect for what's gone into that moment.
Exactly. So for me, that was the moment where I thought, you know what? I can do what he's doing, and I can not only do what he's doing, I can do it better. And I came into TV as a journalist and as a presenter, really recognizing that I was just one cog in a wheel. And I think, if I'm honest, that's probably how I managed to kind of be successful in that world. It wasn't because I was hugely well known. It wasn't because I had a huge presence on social media. It was because people could trust that I was going to deliver. And that has stayed with me to this day. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it.
And also, you mentioned a few times that a conversation started, someone asked you, these opportunities came your way, and that doesn't come from nowhere. So there is the saying, you create your own luck. So to me, it feels like you've had such a strong work ethic from a very, very young age, where opportunities do come your way, doors do open for you because people recognize that. And it feels like you've carried that through to this point anyway, in your career and since. So going from the stage then to behind the scenes, what were some of the new skills that you had to acquire, and did they come naturally to you, or did you have to work on some of that?
Oh, wow. No, they did not come naturally. And I think that's one of the hardest things about telly. And it's one of the reasons I started to coach people actually in how to present to camera, because no one teaches you that sort of stuff. You do a screen test, you get a job, and it's like, right, okay, we're going to throw you in front of a camera and good luck.
Terrifying.
It really is. It really was terrifying. And so I used to watch myself back and just go, oh man, did I really do that? Did I really say that? So was it natural ability, or was it skill? It was skills that I learned. Yes, I think I had the ability, I'd honed from an early age, the ability to kind of build relationships, to build rapport, I was always curious. The skills that I learned when I moved into TV were things like, how do you cope with pressure and stress? How do you remain calm when some of the situations I found myself were really, really scary, some of the live situations? So how do you make sure that even though you've got talk back in your ear, you've got all sorts of stuff happening around you, how do you make sure that you stay focused and in control and at least look like you're confident and in control of the situation? So, strategies for dealing with pressure, things like, how do you really listen, ask really probing questions, but do that in a really empathetic way that builds trust with the people that you're interviewing so that they feel able to open up to you? How do you create a compelling story? So there was loads of skills that I needed to learn. How do you stand? How do you speak clearly? When I think back to being at school, the constant feedback that I had as a child was slow down, like just slow down, because I was coming at life at 100 miles an hour. So I learned, and this is one of the key areas that I work with leaders on now, is the ability to take a breath and to slow down. Those are a lot of skills that I learned.
Fantastic. At what point did you feel the pull towards something more? Did you feel that there missing opportunities, perhaps?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I knew that presenting wasn't going to be enough. And I think that's for a variety of reasons. I think, when you work in TV, it's really exciting. It is. And there is no 2 days are the same. So, which really for me was what I found really exciting. I get energy from variety. I always have done. So meeting new people, new environments. The challenge with telly is that it's out of your control. It's not like you're in an industry, let's say financial services, where you build up your qualifications and your experience and you get promoted and you have that security. TV, film, entertainment does not work in that way. It's often down to, does your face fit? And that's really hard. So I think for me, I've always wanted to have an element of control. And especially when you start to get a little bit older and you realize that actually, if you want to have the nice things in life, if you want to have a bit of security, a house, partner, kids, the two don't necessarily, for me anyway, they don't necessarily work. So when I worked in telly, the stuff that gave me goosebumps was my kind of side hustle, if you like, which was working with businesses, individuals, helping them to present better. So I started quite quickly in my career having a bit of a side hustle as a coach. But at that point, it was always about how do we make sure that you're able to bring out your best self on camera? And that was at the time when, websites, people's company websites, they wanted to bring more personality into it. So they wanted to have CEO or people within the business having a presence. But of course, it doesn't necessarily come naturally to people. So I started to do that on the side. And I absolutely loved it. But at the time, I was still really interested in pursuing a career in TV because I just didn't know where it was going to take me. So I kind of had a foot in either camp, I suppose. And then I had the opportunity to go to Los Angeles. So through, various jobs in the UK, I got in contact, or I don't even know how it happened now, to be honest. I think it was my manager at the time had put me in contact with a company in America. And I just got really excited about the opportunity to go somewhere different, to do something different. So I found myself in Los Angeles, and, LA is quite a weird and wonderful place to be.
For the epicenter of entertainment.
Yeah. It's weird though. It's weird because everyone drives everywhere. So whereas in London, you can kind of bump into people, you don't see anyone in LA. Everyone's in a car. It's bizarre. But so I did some work in Los Angeles, and again, I found that exciting, but it wasn't, by this point, I knew it wasn't really what I wanted to do. The stuff that I really wanted to do was to add value and help others to really be able to realize their potential.
Fantastic. And I love that you already started this side hustle, and so you'd had that knowledge and that experience, and it was lighting you up. It was energizing you. So this is the point in the show where we usually look at that light bulb moment, the point where someone makes that switch to a whole new realm of success. We've called this episode Behind the Scenes, which relates to all the work we put in to present the best version of ourselves to the world. But it also reflects the desire many of us have to break out from behind the scenes and to start taking a leading role. So can you tell us about your big switch moment? Where were you in life, and what was it all like?
The big switch moment, I don't think there's been one.
Okay.
Definitely don't think there's been one. But I think there's one that was definitely, there was the one when I came to SJP, but I think prior to that, I think moving from presenting to more of the coaching, I think that was probably the biggest switch. And that was when I was in Los Angeles. So I'd started dating this guy back home, and he was a performer as well at the time. He was a contemporary dancer. So he was here doing his thing and I was in LA doing my thing. And we'd only been dating probably for about, a year max. And we were on this virtual call to each other, and he suddenly paused and he said, "Should we try for a baby?" And I remember going, "I'm sorry, what? What? What?" because my sister was just about to have her first child. So we're on the subject of that anyway. And he said, should we have a baby? And I thought, whoa, sorry, what? So this conversation happened between the two of us. And by the end of the conversation, essentially what happened was we kind of went backwards and forwards going, shall we? Yeah, but I'm in LA, you're there. You know, how do we make this work? And Jay, my partner at the time, Jay said, should we just toss a coin? And I went, I'm sorry, you're kidding me. And he was like, yeah, well, why not? You know, if we can't decide, let's let the coin decide for us. So I went, fine, okay, fine. And so I grabbed a coin and I tossed it. And he said, you know, if it's heads, we're going to try for a baby. And it came up heads.
Wow.
So we finished the call and I went to Whole Foods and I bought some folic acid and I got on a plane, came home, and I quit TV.
Wow.
I just quit it. So I contacted my manager in LA, my agent in the UK, and said, I'm done. And I think this was just after Christmas. And by the February, we were pregnant.
That's wonderful.
Which is absolutely bonkers. And so it was at that point that I thought, right, okay, I'm really going to start to focus more on performance, coaching, helping people. And I think that's for me where I was able to really start to articulate that my purpose was about personal growth and helping others. So people in performance, helping people, whilst also developing and growing my own skill set as well. And so, yeah, so I had our daughter, Sophia, and I started working. I trained up as a coach and trained up in neuro-linguistic programming, which is all about sort of, I guess, mindset. And that was really interesting because that's when I started to kind of put together the strategies that I'd learned in telly. Because in telly, I had to learn a lot of strategies around performance and mindset and handling pressure. And I kind of found my own route through it. But it was only when I started to learn more coaching and more around sort of the psychology that sits behind it that I was able to go, that's what I did. And that's the impact that it gave me. And then I was able to sort of share those strategies with others. So that was probably the biggest switch. But I think off the back of that came one of the biggest learnings I've ever had. And that was, so I left TV and I started working as a coach. So I worked globally and I worked specifically around communication. So with leaders, helping them to kind of be able to stand a bit taller and really kind of project themselves, project their message. So I did a lot of work with really, really clever people, like far cleverer than I could ever be, helping them to be able to articulate and communicate their message. And I did a lot of that work with leaders and with teams. But I think during that time, we decided to try for another baby. So I think Sophia was maybe 2. And so I went into it really naively and I was like, wow, it happened easy the first time. Clearly it's going to happen like that the second time. And I think that is probably, that period of about 6 years was probably one of the biggest learnings I ever had, because essentially we kept trying, getting pregnant, losing the baby, getting pregnant, losing the baby. And I ended up having this sort of dual persona where, at home, it was really tough, and this is, for me, I'd always been someone who had set out to achieve something and I'd figure out a way to make it happen, So I'm not saying that things came easy to me, because they absolutely didn't. I worked bloody hard, but I was really resourceful. I was able to figure out a way to make things happen. And I found myself in a situation where I couldn't figure this out. And so I had the kind of personal persona of like, just trying to work out what had gone wrong, versus my professional persona where I was traveling the world, standing up, delivering conference speeches, coaching. And there were then for a couple of years sort of two real distinct sides to me. And I remember on one occasion, so it just wasn't happening for us. So we decided to go down the IVF route. And anyone that's gone through IVF will know how bloody tough that is. Mm. And we got pregnant. We were super excited. We got to about, 12 or 13 weeks. And And that's when we found out that it wasn't going to work. And so I had to have an operation. And the operation, it was private because, of course, we had one child already, so everything had to be private. And I had to go through this operation on the Sunday, I think it was. And on the Monday, I was back in the training room.
Gosh.
And now I look back and I think, how the hell did I do that? I basically shut it off. And I guess it comes back to that idea of, if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. So it was a really, really hard time. And I think, my husband and I we spent about 5 years going through IVF, going to London, going to Cyprus, going all over the place, trying IVF, and it just kept failing. And we couldn't figure out what had gone wrong. We decided to go for a final round, and it was probably round 5, I think it was. It was round 5. And we'd run out of all our money. And my dad said, look, let me help you. And so he gave us some money, which was amazing because we basically ran out of all of our money and had quite a lot of debt by this point. But we kept on trying because that's a hard thing about something like fertility is you never know when to stop. When do you give up? When do you just stop? And so my dad had given us some money. So we tried a final time with a brand new company and it worked. So we got to 12 weeks. We were really excited and massively hesitant. And that's when we found out that my dad had cancer.
Oh my gosh.
And so we suddenly found ourselves in a situation where we had tried for years to get to this point. We had tried everything and we kept falling down and picking ourselves back up again and falling down and picking ourselves back up again. All along, I was traveling around the world and I used to find myself, arriving in hotels with all my medication and having to inject myself at all sorts of weird and wonderful times. I mean, it was really bloody tough. It was horrible. And then we finally found that we'd done it. Like we were pregnant. But at the same time, my dad was dying. So when we found out about the cancer, it was so far gone. So we had this really weird a couple of months where basically I was growing this child that we had wanted for so long, and my dad was dying. And so I was 6 months pregnant when my dad died. But you know what? That sounds really sad, and it was, and it is. But what it taught me was that you just have to keep trying, You have to try and figure out a way. And so, my dad died, but he knew that we got there.
Yeah.
So, and his kind of, I guess his spirit lives on through Rafi. So I think one of the biggest lessons I learned during that time was kind of the tenacity to keep going.
Wow, Carole, what a story. I'm sorry you had to go through all of that.
Yeah, do you know what? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. If I could have had it a different way, I would have done. And yeah, I think it's made me stronger.
Absolutely.
I really do. And I think it puts so much into perspective.
Absolutely. And through all of that, it sounds like you were self-employed.
Yeah.
And so I guess one of my questions was, the initial flip of the coin, quit your current job that's probably paying you reasonably well, I'd imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it sounded when you told the story that it was a quick decision and you moved quickly after that flip of the coin. But on this show, when we talk about people changing career, often it's the pre-preparing for it. So it's have I got a financial cushion? So is that something that you'd been quite mindful of prior?
I think I've always been quite good at being able to save. I'm not saying we had loads of money at all, but, when I came to SJP, that was probably, I felt like I'd finally grown up. So I was employed at MTV. That's the only other time I've ever been employed. So I've always been self-employed, and that's just the way that I've worked, and that's kind of the way that I've always liked it. So we had a little bit of money, but I think we both kind of knew that we were both resourceful. And I think that's the thing when you're young, you kind of go, "I'll figure it out," and that's what happened. So it wasn't something that was high on the agenda, i.e., what kind of financial cushion have we got? We just sort of went for it and kind of made do. And we've been really lucky like that.
And then you'd already started your side hustle, your business. I guess you
Yeah.
had a revenue stream, and you knew that you could rely on that.
Yeah.
And in your mind, is there any ideal time to make a significant change? I guess the challenging story you just told about, your son and your dad. I guess that shapes your decisions when you go through big, impactful moments in life. It shapes your decisions. Is there an ideal time for someone to make a big shift or change, do you think?
No. I think it's down to the individual. For me, when I coach anyone, I believe it's really important for someone to understand their why. Like, why do they get up and out of bed in the morning? Why do they do what they do? And so for everybody, it'll come at a different time. But what is really important is to have the courage to give it a go. You have one life, right? And life goes really quick. And I think you have to take every opportunity that comes your way. And it's very easy to sort of sit back and go, let's just sort of see what happens, or it doesn't feel like the right time. And I'm not saying that you have to be haphazard and just take big challenges. But I think it's always about going, what's my purpose? What do I really want to do in life? What's going to drive me? We spend so much of our time at work. You have to love what you do. You have to. So, and I say that with the understanding that people find love in different ways, right? So it's not the same from one person to another. So I think you can have a switch at any point. But I think what's really important is to take the time to understand yourself, because life goes by in a bit of a blur. We're all really busy people. So it's about taking a beat and going, okay. And I do this a couple of times every year. I go, okay, right. Let me just take a pause. Where am I right now? And am I doing the stuff that I want to do? Am I growing in the way that I want to grow? Am I spending time with the people that I want to spend time with? And if the answer is yes, brilliant, keep on doing it. But if the answer is no, you got to listen to that and go, okay, what changes do I need to make? And that's not to say it's going to be easy. So I think I've made a lot of career changes. I started off as in theatre, and I moved into being a runner, and I went from being in TV production to being a presenter, and then I left that and became a coach. And I now, I pivoted quite dramatically to the work that I do at SJP. And it takes courage to do that. And there's, you may have heard of her, the psychologist Carole Dweck, and she talks about the helpless versus the masterful. So it's very easy to sort of sit in that kind of helpless, fixed mindset where you go, well, this is my life, this is what I need to do. And that's it. It can be very easy to do that. It can be much harder to go, okay, this is the situation I find myself in. Am I happy? And if the answer is no, what can you do about it?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And you've touched throughout the interview your desire to help people through their skills and their development. So let's talk specifically now about that journey into St. James's Place, where you now are. What happened behind the scenes to get here?
Yeah. I knew I wanted, so essentially what I was doing is I would go in and I'd work with people and develop their skill set, develop their mindset, whatever it was. And then I would kind of leave. So I'd sort of be parachuted in to do something and then I'd go. So I never really got an opportunity to see the outcome, what happened next sort of thing. So, I was talking to a director at the time about the fact that I really wanted an opportunity to kind of, see the kind of the from start to finish, what happens with developments? What is that? What is that journey that people go on? And I'd started to do a lot of research into that, and I'd worked within a lot of businesses, kind of consulting in a lot of businesses around actually how do we help them to improve. And I thought actually what I'd like to do is actually go and work in one of those businesses and actually be part of it. So get into the team, be part of the team, and actually be able to have a greater impact. And so a job came up at SJP, and it's that old saying, isn't it, where I think and I can't even remember the stats on it, but if a woman can do 90% of the job, typically she says no. And this is a generalization. Whereas if a man can do 60%, whatever it is, they'll go for it. I had that moment where I thought, when I looked at the JD, I thought, I'm not sure I can do all of that yet. And I think that word yet is really critical.
Love that.
And I thought, you know what, let's just go for it. Let's give it a go. What's the worst that can happen, right? I don't get the job. Okay, fine. I learn from it and I move on. And so I had my first interview. I think it was really, really bad. I think I was absolutely appalling. I don't know what on earth I said in that interview. But for whatever reason, I then had an opportunity to meet the COO. And so I had an interview with the COO. I then had following interviews. I met a few more people, had a few more interviews, and was really lucky to get the opportunity to come on board. And it was a big learning experience for me again, because I'd pretty much always been self-employed. I didn't know what it meant to be in a big organization like SJP. I didn't understand all the different business areas or the processes behind things. And of course, when I came in, because of my background, I came in and I was like, right, this is your team you're going to manage. This is the division you're going to work in. And I had to learn quickly. But I did learn quickly with the help of others. And so I think if I was going to share one piece of advice, it would be just get really curious and ask for help. And recognize that everyone is on a journey. So at that point for me, there was a lot of gaps in my knowledge. But I went out, I sought help. I was like, okay, you need to talk to me about this. You need to talk to me about this. And do you know what? People were really generous with their time. And so I really quickly started to build up my knowledge around actually what goes on in the corporate world. But it was quite a learning experience over a really short space of time. So, yeah.
I think that's one of the things that struck me when I joined St. James's Place was the helpful nature of everybody. Yeah, everybody here is very generous with their time. You have actually just got to ask. But I think we're very lucky that we're in that environment. But I think actually if people are brave enough to ask for help in any setting, people are usually willing to share their knowledge because it's quite flattering to be asked.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
I feel like people should listen to what you've just said, but also be brave themselves, whether they're here or anywhere else. It's flattering to be asked for help, and people generally are generous with their time and their support.
But it can feel quite scary to do that, can't it?
Definitely.
Because it puts you in quite a vulnerable position, because essentially you're saying, I'm sorry, I don't know this. And
in the workplace, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's a really scary thing to do. But I think if you can kind of get over the kind of weirdness of going, I don't know what I'm doing with this, can you help me? To your point, people generally are pretty open to helping. And actually, I've had so many mentors in my life. And when I talk about mentors, I don't necessarily mean sort of formal mentors, i.e., we've worked together for sort of 6 months. I've had lots of sort of micro mentoring moments, I think, where I've just had half an hour with this person or an hour with this person. I've gone, look, tell me, how do you do that thing? And I think that's kind of stayed with me throughout my entire career, actually. Finding those role models, people that you look at and go, I love the way you do X, or you seem to know a lot about Y. And then it's the opportunity to get really curious and get under the skin of why someone does what they do or how they do what they do to help you to learn.
Absolutely. And I think also in the context of career change, you don't know everything about the new career you're going to. So finding somebody who's already doing that role, having the confidence to go and ask them about it. Generally, people will be very open to, singing the praises of what they're doing and talking about themselves, talking about their profession. So I think that's really helpful. But we have a saying at the Academy, BBQ, be brave quicker. And I think that's a shining example of what you did when you came here, being brave and asking the questions, being curious, and it gets you to where you need to be much faster.
Yeah, I really like that. BBQ, I'm going to keep that on there. I like that one. But I think, for a lot of people, imposter syndrome or imposter moments is definitely plays a part. And it has for me throughout my career. There's been so many moments where I thought, I don't feel equipped to do this. I really don't feel equipped to do this. And something that sort of stayed with me throughout my career is just that I've always been able to reframe situations. And what's helped me with that is to have a positive statement. So I know you've heard of the chimp paradox. There's a great book called The Chimp Paradox by Dr. Steve Peters, and he talks about the chimp inside your head. And we've all got one to a lesser or greater degree. We've all got that limiting voice inside our head that questions us, that goes, can you really do that? No, do you know what? Don't do it. You're going to make a fool of yourself. That voice. And I think if you can find strategies to sort of quieten down the monkey mind, you're going to put yourself in a much better position. So I have always had this phrase, and it's I've always had this sort of positive self-statement that I have matched with a bit of breathing when I found myself in those high pressure situations. So my positive statement, and you've probably got one as well, G, have you? Mine was always, I'm going to nail this. I've done it before. I can do it again. And even if I haven't done that thing before, I've done something before. I'm going to nail it. Done it before. I can do it again. Have you got one?
Do you know, I haven't, but I'm going to make sure that I do. And what I also loved about what you said just a moment ago was, I don't know how to do that yet.
Yes.
You just add that tiny 3-letter word to the end of something, and that just gives you the confidence that you've learned something challenging before and you were able to execute on it. And so just draw the confidence from, it could be something completely different, but draw confidence from a previous experience. So I'm going to take that away and have a positive statement for myself.
I think that's a good idea. I honestly really do. And that kind of all feeds into that sort of masterful mindset, which is just knowing that you are capable of so much more than you think you are. When I worked in telly, I used to, on my way to doing a show, especially live TV, which is just really scary. And I don't really know why I put myself through that, because it was incredibly scary. But I did. And I used to sort of drive there. And on the way there, you think logically, what on earth are you doing? You're about to go out and present something to, on some occasions, a couple of million people. It's like, ugh. So I'd be waiting in the wings to go on and do my show. And I'd have talk back in my ear. And someone would be going, Carole, you're live in 5, 4, 3. And it was normally at 3 that I would suddenly go, but actually, having that positive self-statement can help you overcome some of the most scariest things. And honestly, I don't know how I did it, but when either action was called or when I walked out on set, I don't know how, but I just seemed to be really calm. Maybe it was the breathing. I love a bit of breathing.
Yeah. And like you say, it's having some tools in your kit, and it's experimenting with what works for you.
Yeah.
And having experts around you to help you with these techniques, obviously.
Yeah.
So you have experienced quite a non-traditional path to where you are today. Have you experienced any challenges, societal expectations, for example, anything that springs to mind by taking a non-traditional route?
No, I think it's served me well. I don't think there is one route for all. I think there are many routes, and I suppose mine is less traditional than many. And I think with that has come at times those imposter moments when I think, gosh, I haven't sort of worked my way up through the ranks in the corporate world or whatever it might be. But I think it's served me pretty well. And I think the more that you can kind of lean on transferable skills. So when I think about a career, I really think about, and there's that great phrase, isn't there, kind of squiggly career.
Yeah.
I don't think there's one traditional route anymore. I think it's about stacking your skills and then being able to recognize the strengths that you have and how you can take those strengths from one role into another. I think that's the biggie.
Absolutely. Carole, one of the things we discussed prior to this recording was a book that you took a lot from historically, and it was called Success Principles.
Yes.
So tell us a bit about when you discovered this book and what it's taught you.
In fact, I've got it here, and I can't remember who gave it to me. I've just seen something in there that says, Jason must read this bit. Jason's my husband. somebody recommended it to me. I can't for the life of me remember who. It was at a time in my career when I was working in telly, and I felt like I needed to start to take more control of my destiny, because it felt like, I think it may have been off the back of MTV when I mentioned earlier, where I suddenly found out that someone was auditioning for my job. And that was really crushing. I mean, that was tough. And I think it was at that point where I thought, God, I want to have more agency. Like, I want to feel like I've got control over what comes my way. And so I forget who, but somebody recommended this book to me, Jack Canfield, The Success Principles. It says how to get from where you are to where you want to be. And yeah, it sounds good. And it was really great. It's a book that I've recommended and bought for so many of my friends. And my copy here, I'm just having a quick look inside now. I mean, there's highlighter pen all over it. But some of the key things for me that stood out in this book was around taking full responsibility for your life. So, get rid of any excuses. Like, it's on you. The only person that's going to be able to help you get to where you want to be, first and foremost, is you, right? So you've got to take full ownership of that. It's not to say people can't help you, but you need to know where you're going. Things like, chunking it down, because I think that's a really critical one, because sometimes it can feel quite overwhelming to go, well, where do I want to be? What do I want to do? What's the vision? What's the plan? That can feel quite big, and it is big. But chunking it down, just going, okay, what does the next 6 to 12 months look like? If I could be somewhere in 12 months, where would I be? What would that look like? Okay, and what are some of the steps, not all of them, but what are some of the steps that would help me get there? Because I think once you get a little bit more focused like that, opportunities, like I've mentioned earlier, just seem to come your way. There's the RAS gland. Have you heard about the RAS gland? I haven't. The reticular activating system. So you know what it's like when you're going to go and buy a car and you decide you want to buy a Mini. And you go, right, I'm going to buy a Mini. And then suddenly you just see Minis everywhere, don't you?
Yes.
So it's the same sort of thing. The RAS gland, when you get really clear about what it is you want to do or be or where you want to go, suddenly things just that you just weren't aware of before come into your field of vision. So yeah, chunking things down and then feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And I think that's a biggie. If I thought about some of the things that I've done, really thought about everything that could possibly go wrong, I probably wouldn't have done them. But I've gone, you know what? I'm going to feel the fear and do it anyway.
I love that.
Yeah.
So what are some of the ways our listeners could go about making their career progression or performance easier or more successful? We mentioned many throughout the conversation.
It all starts with really understanding yourself. And what do I mean by that? Self-awareness. Who are you at your core? What's important to you? So actually taking some time to stop, reflect, get really clear on what's the right environment for me to be in. What is the stuff that gets me out of bed in the morning? So what's my purpose? What's my why? What am I good at? What are the things that actually I enjoy and that I'm good at? And people talk about, strengths and weaknesses. I look at weaknesses not as things that you're not good at, but things that weaken you. So you might be amazing at spreadsheets. I don't know whether you are. I'm terrible at them. But, you might be amazing. But does it give you energy? Yes or no? If it's no, then get rid of it. It's not to say you don't have to do spreadsheets, but, it's about recognizing what you're really good at. What's the stuff that you really enjoy? And then starting to figure out, okay, so that's the stuff that I really enjoy. What's the kind of role or roles that I could do that are going to give me that joy? And it's not to say that you're going to love everything that you do. Of course not. But if you need to enjoy a good proportion of it.
Absolutely. And I think it's difficult sometimes to know where to start on that self-reflection. And I've got 2 words to describe what you just said, which is drivers and drainers.
Great.
And it could be, okay, what do I do? And you might want to make a note in a given week. What are the things I'm working on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? And then you might categorize them into, well, what energized me and what really drained me. That's a starting point, right? So it's just sometimes it's where do I start? What's the first thing I can do about exploring the next step? So I love that. Thank you.
I love that as well. I'm going to hang on to that one. I think the other thing that can really help though is to get feedback.
Definitely.
So, understanding for yourself, what you're good at, what drives you, your drivers and your drainers. I love that. But then it's also to start to recognize how do other people experience you? I think that's really important as well.
Really good.
To be successful, you've got to have a good understanding about how you show up for others. So we talk about brand and reputation, and we do at SJP, and we do just generally. I think it's probably worth differentiating between the two, because brand is essentially, what do you want to be known for? So that's thinking about, what are your strengths? What are your, unique selling points or USP? What are things that make you you? That's your brand. Your reputation is, how do people actually experience you? And they're not always the same thing. They're not always the same thing. And actually what we're looking for is consistency across both. So that requires, again, back to courage, going out, asking for feedback. What do you experience when you spend time with me? What am I good at? But also, what's getting in my way? What's getting in my way? And then when you do that enough times, you start to pick up themes. You start to go, okay. And I tell you what, it can be really hard going, but it's really, really useful.
Development areas, understanding what they are, and then understanding how you can get help to overcome something.
Yeah.
Great information.
Yeah.
As hard as it might be to take initially.
It can be really hard, but it's, again, going in that masterful mindset, going, this is going to help me. It may be tough now to hear it. And at least now I know the areas that I need to potentially work on.
Yeah.
So if that's, if you're looking to be successful, I think it starts with self-awareness. How do you experience you? Who are you at your core? But then also, how do other people experience you?
I think that's such valuable advice, whether you are changing career or looking for a step up potentially in your current role. It's asking the advice of others. Can you see me in this position, in this role? And taking on that feedback and then working on maybe some of the things that surprise you, shall we say.
Yeah.
So let's end on this question, Carole. What would be your single most important piece of advice for our listeners who are considering a career switch?
I think it does come down to self-awareness first and foremost, really knowing who you are at your core, what drives you, the stuff that you love doing. But then it has to be that grit and determination. Going for what you want is worth it, but it's not easy. It can be bloody difficult. So finding ways to work through people, with people, stay really focused on where you want to be, have the determination, the grit, and importantly, the courage.
And I think something you said right at the start was have the right people around you.
So important. There's that great saying, I think it was Jim Rohn, who says, you are the average of the 5 people around you. So I think pick your people really wisely.
Great piece of advice. Thank you so much for coming on The Switch.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Switch. Our key takeaways from today's episode are integrity in all that you do. If it doesn't feel right, don't do it. Take chances, learn from your mistakes, and switch back into a growth mindset and reframe situations into a positive one. Find a good role model and be a good role model. What do people say about you when you're not in the room? And finally, what you think about, you bring about.